Welcome back to Raven's Library, where the alphas are dangerous and the heroines bite back. Quick question for the pack before we dive into today's chaos. Where are you listening from right now? Let me know in the comments, and drop a paw print emoji if your pet is currently judging your audiobook choices. Today, we have a special one. It's funny, it's tense, and it involves a very angry doctor and a very naked king. But before we start, if you want to support the channel and get early access to stories like this, hit that join button down below. It helps us keep the lights on and the stories coming. Now, take a deep breath. The doctor is in, and the king is in trouble. Let's read. Chapter 1. The clipboard hit the metal counter with a sound like a gunshot. That got his attention. I didn't even look up at the massive wall of muscle standing by the window. I just checked my watch, tapped the glass face with a manicured fingernail, and let out a sigh that was 90% exhaustion and 10% pure rage. 15 minutes, I snapped, keeping my eyes on the intake form. You're 15 minutes late, recruit. Do you think the enemy is going to wait for you to finish your protein shake before they rip your throat out? Silence. Heavy, predatory silence. I finally looked up. And then I looked up some more. The man was enormous. He took up half the oxygen in the room. He was wearing a plain black t-shirt that was struggling to contain a chest the size of a compact car, and his thighs in those dark tactical pants looked like tree trunks. He had a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes the color of molten gold. He wasn't cowering. He wasn't apologizing. He was staring at me with a look of absolute baffled amusement. "Well," I barked, grabbing a reflex hammer from the tray. "Don't just stand there looking pretty, Bubba. I have 3 ACL tears and a shattered collarbone waiting in the hall. You're wasting my time." He blinked. A slow, lazy smirk spread across his face, revealing a flash of white teeth that looked sharper than average. "Bubba?" His voice was a deep rumble, the kind of sound that you feel in your chest cavity before you hear it in your ears. "Is that what they're calling me these days?" "It's the name on the file," I said, waving the clipboard at him. "Bubba Smith, new recruit, tardy, insubordinate, and apparently deaf." I walked around the counter, my heels clicking sharply on the linoleum. I stopped right in front of him. I had to crane my neck back so far to look him in the eye that my cervical spine popped. "Here is how this works," I said, stepping into his personal space. Most men stepped back when I did that. He didn't flinch. He leaned in. "I am Dr. Vale. You are a slab of meat that the Royal Guard wants me to certify as Grade A. I don't care how big you are, and I don't care who your daddy is. In this room, you are mine." His eyes darkened. The gold iris seemed to swirl. He inhaled deeply, as if he was scenting me. "Yours," he repeated, the word rolling off his tongue like a caress. I suppose that's one way to put it. "Glad we agree. Now, strip." He raised a thick, dark eyebrow. "Buy a man dinner first, Doctor?" I said strip. Shirt off, pants off, boxer briefs stay on unless I find a hernia, in which case, God help us both. I pointed the rubber head of the reflex hammer at his chest. "Move. Now." For a second, I thought he was going to refuse. I thought he was going to snap my little hammer in half and throw me out the window. But then, the smirk widened. He lifted his hands in mock surrender. "As you command, ma'am." He grabbed the hem of his black shirt and pulled it over his head in one fluid motion. I had been a physical therapist for the Royal Guard for 4 years. I had seen thousands of bodies. I had seen scars, deformities, and muscles built in a lab. But I had never seen anything like him. He was a map of violence. Several long, jagged scars ran across his ribs, claw marks, old ones. But the muscle underneath was perfect. Not the puffy, steroid-bloated muscle of the usual recruits, but dense, corded, lethal power. He looked like he had been carved out of granite and dropped into a war zone. I forced myself to be professional. I swallowed the lump in my throat and stepped forward, jamming my cold stethoscope against his pectoral muscle. "Heart rate is elevated," I muttered, listening to the slow, heavy thud, thud, thud of his heart. It sounded like a war drum. "You're standing very close," he murmured. His voice vibrated through the stethoscope, right into my ears. "Occupational hazard," I replied, moving the metal disc down to his abs. He twitched. "Ticklish, Bubba?" "No." He looked down at the top of my head. "Just sensitive to heat." I ignored him. I moved around to his back. "Shoulders are tight. You're carrying tension in your trapezius, probably from poor form." I reached up and dug my thumbs into the thick muscle between his neck and shoulder. It was like trying to massage a brick wall. "Relax," I ordered, pushing harder. "Drop your shoulders." "I am relaxed." "You are not. You're stiff as a board." I decided to use a little percussive therapy. I slapped his right shoulder blade with my open palm. A sharp thwack echoed in the small room. "I said relax." A low, guttural sound rumbled in his chest. A growl. I froze. My hand was still resting on his burning, hot skin. That wasn't a human sound. That was the sound of a predator warning its prey, or playing with it. I stepped back, grabbing the counter for support. "No growling in the clinic," I scolded, finding my voice. "I don't care what your inner wolf thinks. I'm the alpha in this room." He turned slowly. The predatory amusement was gone, replaced by a dark, hungry intensity that made the hair on my arms stand up. He took a step toward me, then another. He backed me right up against the instrument tray. "You're the alpha," he whispered, looming over me, blocking out the harsh fluorescent lights. "Is that a fact, Doctor?" "Yes," I said, though my voice shook. I reached behind me, my fingers closing around the handle of my stun baton, just in case. "And right now, the alpha orders you to get on that exam table." He glanced at the table, then back at me. His eyes dropped to my lips, then back up to my eyes. "And if I refuse?" I clicked the safety off the baton. A crackle of blue electricity sparked in the air between us. "Then I'm going to have to subdue you," I promised. "And Bubba, I don't miss." The blue arc of electricity popped and hissed between us, casting frantic shadows against the sterile white walls. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but I kept my hand steady. You don't show fear to a predator, even if that predator is 6'7", built like a tank, and looking at your high-voltage weapon like it's a chew toy. 3 seconds, I warned, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. 1. He didn't move. He just watched me, that lazy, infuriating smirk playing on his lips. He looked like he was contemplating grabbing the baton just to see if it tickled. 2. "You really enjoy being in charge, don't you, Margo?" he asked softly. He used my first name. Not doctor, not ma'am. Margo. The way he said it made it sound like a dirty secret. "That's Dr. Vale to you, recruit. And yes, in this room, I am God." 3. I thrust the baton forward, aiming for the dense muscle of his pectoral. I stopped an inch from his skin, the ozone smell of the spark filling the gap between us. He didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He just let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound of genuine delight, and finally stepped back. "Fine," he said, holding his hands up, palms open. "You win. No need to fry the merchandise." He turned and walked toward the exam table. Even his walk was arrogant. It was a prowl. He moved with a heavy, lethal grace that shouldn't have been possible for a man of his size. He sat on the edge of the table, the paper crinkling loudly under his weight. The table actually groaned. "This equipment is substandard," he noted, gripping the edge of the leather pad. His knuckles were white, his hands massive. "It feels like it's going to collapse." "It's rated for 400 pounds, I said, clicking the safety back on the baton and shoving it into my holster. "If you break it, it's coming out of your pay, Bubba." I walked over to him, snapping a fresh pair of latex gloves onto my hands. The sharp snap made his ears twitch. "Lay back," I ordered, "and keep your mouth shut. I need to check your range of motion." He leaned back, his boots hanging off the end of the table. He was so long that his head was barely resting on the pillow. He looked ridiculous and terrifying. His chest was rising and falling in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. I stepped between his spread legs. It was a purely clinical position. I needed to check the rotation of his hips, but the heat radiating off him was distracting. It was like standing next to a furnace. "Unlift your right leg," I commanded. He obeyed. I grabbed his ankle and his knee, pushing his leg toward his chest to check the hip flexion. His leg was heavy, a solid column of bone and muscle. "Relax the leg," I said, frowning. "You're fighting me." "I'm not fighting," he grunted, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. "You have cold hands." "Suck it up." I pushed harder, forcing his knee toward his shoulder. He let out a sharp hiss of breath. Not pain. Something else. I looked down. His eyes were no longer on the ceiling. They were locked on me, burning with that strange golden intensity. His pupils were blown wide. "Does that hurt?" I asked, pausing. "No," he rasped. "Keep going." I frowned. I rotated his hip outward. It was a vulnerable position for a man, especially an alpha. But he didn't pull away. He let me manipulate his body, let me twist and pull, surrendering complete control. I moved to his left leg. I grabbed his calf, my fingers sinking into the muscle. There was a faint tremor running through him. "You're shaking," I accused. "Are you dehydrated? Did you skip breakfast?" "I'm hungry," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "But not for food." I rolled my eyes. "Save the pickup lines for the barracks bunnies, Bubba. They might actually be impressed by the size of your—" I paused, lifting his leg high. "Quadriceps." He chuckled, the sound vibrating through the exam table. "Careful, doctor. You're blushing." "I am flushing from exertion because you weigh as much as a baby elephant," I snapped. I dropped his leg. It hit the table with a heavy thud. I grabbed my clipboard and scribbled a note. "Patient exhibits high pain tolerance and excessive ego." "All right," I said, tossing the clipboard onto the counter. "I've seen enough of the front. Flip over." He didn't move immediately. He just lay there, shirtless, sweaty, and sprawling, looking like a centerfold for Bad Decisions Monthly. "Did you hear me?" I asked, tapping my foot. "Face down. I need to check your spine. And if you make one more comment about my hands, I'm getting the thermometer." He grinned, a wicked, dangerous expression that made my stomach do a distinct flip. "Promises, promises," he whispered. Then, with a fluid rolling motion, he turned over, burying his face in the paper pillow. The view from the back was even more intimidating than the front. His back was a masterpiece of violence, a tapestry of scars, claw marks, burn scars, thin white lines that looked like knife wounds crisscrossed his skin. But beneath the history of pain was a geography of power. His latissimus dorsi flared out like wings, tapering down to a waist that was narrow and hard. I took a breath. Professional. Be professional. "I'm going to palpate your spine," I announced. "Tell me if you feel any sharp pain." I placed my hands on his upper back, right at the base of his neck. His skin was scorching hot. It felt like touching a live wire. I pressed my thumbs into the paraspinal muscles. They were rock hard. "Jesus," I muttered. "Do you ever sleep? These knots have been here since the Bronze Age." "Occupational stress," came the muffled reply from the pillow. "What did you do before you enlisted?" I asked, moving my hands down between his shoulder blades. I dug my thumbs in deep, trying to separate the muscle fibers. "Move rocks with your face?" "Something like that." I leaned my weight into it. My thumbs were already starting to ache. "You need to breathe into the pressure. Inhale." He took a deep breath, his rib cage expanding against the table. "Exhale." He let it out in a long, shuddering sigh. I used the moment of relaxation to drive my knuckles into a particularly nasty knot under his right scapula. A low, rumbling growl erupted from his chest. It wasn't a human noise. It was the sound of a large engine turning over. It vibrated through his ribs, through the table, and straight up my arms. I snatched my hands back as if I'd been burned. "What did I say about the growling?" I scolded, my voice sharp. "It's threatening behavior. We have zero tolerance for aggression in the medical wing." He lifted his head slightly, turning to look at me with one golden eye. "It wasn't a threat, Margo." "It sounded like a threat." "If I wanted to threaten you," he said softly, "you wouldn't be standing there scolding me. You'd be running." "I don't run," I lied. My knees were shaking. "Face down. I'm not done." He dropped his head back onto the pillow, but the tension in the room had shifted. It wasn't just clinical anymore. The air felt thick, charged with static. I went back to work. I moved down to his lower back. The muscles there were even tighter. 2 steel cables running along his spine. I pushed. Nothing happened. I tried to use the heel of my hand. Nothing. He was too big, too dense. My hands weren't strong enough to break through the armor of muscle he had built. "Damn it," I hissed, wiping sweat from my forehead with my shoulder. "Problem? You're too thick," I complained. "I can't get enough leverage from this angle. I need to get deeper." "Be my guest." I looked at the table. I looked at him. There was only one way to get the angle I needed. I had to use gravity. I grabbed the edge of the table and hoisted myself up. The table creaked ominously as I added my weight to it. I placed one knee on the leather, right next to his hip, then the other. I was now kneeling on the exam table, straddling the massive recruit. "Don't get any ideas," I warned, positioning myself over his lower back. "This is a standard technique for hypertrophy patients." "I haven't said a word," he murmured into the pillow, but I could hear the smile in his voice. I sat back on my heels, hovering just above his glutes. From this height, he looked even bigger. I felt like a jockey on a thoroughbred racehorse. "All right," I said, bracing myself. I'm going to use my elbow. This is going to hurt. Do your worst, doctor. I leaned forward, placing the point of my elbow into the erector spinae muscle on his left side. I grabbed his opposite shoulder for leverage and leaned my entire body weight into the drive. He groaned, a deep, guttural sound that was half pain, half ecstasy. Breathe, I commanded, grinding my elbow in a slow circle. He gripped the edges of the table so hard the leather groaned. Harder. I am giving it everything I've got, Bubba. Harder, he growled. Don't hold back. Something about the demand snapped a wire in my brain. He wanted rough? I'd give him rough. I lifting my hips and practically dropped my weight onto his back, driving my elbow down like a spear. He shuddered, his whole body arching slightly against the table. That's it, he rasped. Right there. I was sweating now. Strands of hair were sticking to my face. I was riding the back of a lethal weapon, inflicting pain, and he was begging for more. It was intoxicating. The power dynamic had shifted, or maybe it had just twisted into something new. I was on top. I was in control. You like that? I panted, digging deeper. You like being pinned down? I like your enthusiasm, he choked out. I was about to reply, about to tell him that if he moved an inch, I'd paralyze him, when the handle of the exam room door turned. I froze. I was sitting on top of a patient. My hair was a mess, my face was flushed, and the sounds coming from the room for the last 5 minutes could easily have been misinterpreted as something else. The door swung open. Hey, Dr. Vale? A voice squeaked. Sorry I'm late. The bus broke down and... A skinny, pale kid with a shaved head walked in. He was holding a gym bag that looked too heavy for him. He stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes went from me to the massive man beneath me and back to me. He dropped his gym bag. Bubba? I asked, my voice high and thin. The kid nodded slowly, terrified. Yes, ma'am? My blood ran cold. If the skinny kid was Bubba, then who the hell was I sitting on? I looked down. The man beneath me had stopped breathing. He slowly, deliberately, lifted his head from the pillow. He turned to look at the door. His eyes were glowing. Not just catching the light. They were literally glowing. 2 pools of molten gold fire. He looked at the terrified kid. Then he looked up at me, perched on his back like a conqueror. A slow, terrifying grin spread across his face. You're late, recruit. The man on the table growled at the kid, his voice vibrating through my own thighs. But the doctor is busy. The air in the room didn't just freeze, it evaporated. Your Majesty? Bubba squeaked, his voice cracking like a dry twig. He looked like he was about to vomit his entire nervous system onto my pristine linoleum floor. I blinked. My brain, usually a finely tuned instrument of medical diagnostics, stalled. Majesty? There was only one person in the entire kingdom addressed that way, and he wasn't a recruit named Bubba. Slowly, terrifyingly slowly, I looked down at the man I was currently straddling. The man I had just scolded, slapped, and elbowed in the spine with enough force to dent a car door. He wasn't hiding it anymore. The glamour or suppression he must have been using to dampen his aura was gone. It hit me like a physical wave, the scent of rain, ozone, and absolute crushing power. Alpha Prime power. King Ronan. The butcher of the king. The ruler of all shifters. The man who reportedly tore a rogue alpha in half with his bare hands last winter. And I was sitting on his ass. "Oh, God," I whispered. "Don't stop, Doctor," Ronan purred, the sound vibrating directly against my inner thighs. His golden eyes were lit with a wicked, predatory amusement. "I believe you were telling me about my insufficient leverage." I scrambled backward, like I had been electrocuted. I tried to dismount gracefully, but my knees slipped on the leather, and I nearly face-planted into the tray of surgical instruments. I caught myself on the counter, gasping for air, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I didn't," I stammered, pointing a shaking finger at him. "You said your name was Bubba." Ronan sat up. The movement was fluid, terrifyingly controlled. He swung his massive legs over the side of the table and rolled his neck. A sickening crack echoed in the silent room. "I asked if that's what they were calling me," he corrected, his voice smooth as velvet wrapped around a razor blade. "You were the one who insisted on the name." He stood up, and kept standing up. Up close, he was even bigger than he had seemed on the table. He towered over me, a wall of scarred muscle and dark intensity. The sheer size of him made the room feel like a closet. He adjusted the waistband of his tactical pants, the movement drawing my eyes to the V-lines of muscle disappearing into his waistband. Bubba, the real one, was currently trying to merge with the door frame. "Get out," Ronan said, without looking away from me. Yes, Your Majesty. Sorry, Your Majesty." Bubba scrambled backward, tripping over his own gym bag, and practically fell out into the hallway. The door slammed shut. We were alone. The silence stretched, heavy and thick. I pressed my back against the counter, my hands gripping the cold edge so hard my knuckles turned white. Technically, I had just assaulted the monarch. That was treason. Treason was punishable by death. Or worse, exile to the human lands. "So," Ronan said, taking a slow step toward me. "Dr. Margo Vale." "Your Majesty," I managed to choke out. I tried to summon my professional voice, the one I used on difficult generals, but it came out thin and reedy. Clearly, there has been a misunderstanding regarding your intake form." "Clearly," he agreed, taking another step. He was stalking me. There was no other word for it. If you had known," he interrupted, stopping just inches from me, "would you have touched me like that?" My breath hitched. He was close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off his bare chest. I could count the eyelashes framing those terrifying golden eyes. "I was performing a medical assessment," I said, lifting my chin. I refused to cower. I was a doctor, damn it. "I treat all patients with the same level of rigor." "Rigor," he repeated, testing the word. A slow, dark smile spread across his face. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf who just found a rabbit with a backbone. "Is that what you call straddling your king and driving your elbow into his spine?" "Your erectors were tight," I defended, my voice rising. "You have terrible posture for a royal." His eyes widened slightly. Surprise flashed across his face, followed immediately by a darkening of his irises. "You're still scolding me," he murmured, leaning down. His face was level with mine now. "Most people would be begging for mercy by now, Margo." "I did my job," I said, though my knees were trembling so hard I thought they might buckle. If you didn't want to be treated like a recruit, you shouldn't have snuck into my clinic wearing that. I gestured vaguely at his black t-shirt on the floor. He chuckled. It was a dark, rumbling sound that did strange things to my insides. I like your job, he whispered. He reached out, his large hand hovering near my face. I flinched, expecting a strike. Instead, his thumb brushed my cheekbone. His skin was rough, calloused from years of wielding weapons. The touch was shockingly gentle, but possessive. You have a very firm touch, Doctor, he said softly. I think I might require ongoing physical therapy. My mouth went dry. I'm sure the royal healers are more qualified. The royal healers are terrified of me, he said flatly. He dropped his hand, but he didn't step back. They touch me like I'm made of glass. You touch me like I'm a problem you want to solve. He grabbed his t-shirt from the floor and pulled it on. The movement rippled through his back muscles, muscles I now knew intimately. Consider yourself booked, he said, walking toward the door. He paused with his hand on the handle and looked back over his shoulder. Same time tomorrow. Don't be late. I'm never late, I snapped instinctively. He grinned. Good, because I hate waiting. He opened the door and walked out, leaving me alone in the scent of ozone and impending doom. I spent the next hour hyperventilating in the supply closet. Every time footsteps passed the door, I flinched, expecting the royal guard to burst in and drag me to the dungeons. I replayed the last 20 minutes in my head on an agonizing loop. I told the king to strip. I slapped the king. I sat on the king. I told the king he had bad posture. I'm dead, I whispered to a box of sterile gauze. I am actually deceased. I tried to distract myself with work. I cleaned the exam table, scrubbing it 3 times with bleach because it smelled like him. I reorganized the cabinet. I yelled at the real Bubba when he finally came back, mostly to prove I hadn't lost my nerve. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. By the time evening rolled around, I was exhausted. The adrenaline crash had left me jittery and raw. I just wanted to go home, drink a bottle of wine, and update my resume for a job in a different continent. I locked up the clinic and turned to leave. 2 men were standing in the hallway. They weren't regular security. They were royal guards, wearing the elite black and gold armor that marked them as the king's personal detail. They were massive, stone-faced, and heavily armed. Dr. Vale, the one on the left said. It wasn't a question. Yes? I squeaked, clutching my purse like a shield. Come with us. Am I under arrest? I asked, my voice trembling, because if this is about the elbow thing, I can explain the medical necessity. The king requests your presence, the guard interrupted. Immediately. Requests? I asked. Or commands? The guard didn't answer. He just gestured down the hall, toward the royal wing, the restricted sector, the place where normal staff were never, ever allowed to go. Okay, I breathed. Okay, I'm coming. The walk felt like a funeral procession. The corridors got wider, the carpets plusher, the lighting softer. We passed portraits of past kings, grim, scary men who looked like they ate doctors for breakfast. We stopped in front of a massive set of double doors, carved from dark mahogany. The guards opened them without knocking. Inside, the guard ordered. I walked in. The doors boomed shut behind me. The room was enormous. A fireplace roared on one wall. There was a desk covered in maps, a balcony overlooking the city, and a bed the size of a landing strip. And there, lying in the center of the bed, was Ronan. He was shirtless. Again. He was propped up against a mountain of pillows, reading a dossier. He looked up as I entered, his eyes locking onto mine with that same unnerving intensity. "You're late," he said. "It's 8 p.m., I said, my voice echoing in the vast room. "My shift ended 2 hours ago." "Exactly," he said, tossing the dossier onto the nightstand. He patted the empty space on the mattress beside him. "I threw my back out again, doctor. Come fix it." I stared at him. He didn't look injured. He looked perfectly, terrifyingly healthy. "You're faking," I accused, forgetting for a second that he could have me beheaded. "Maybe," he shrugged, wincing with a theatricality that wouldn't have fooled a toddler. "But are you willing to take that risk? What if the king is in pain?" He patted the bed again, harder this time. "Come here, Margo. I need your hands." "I threw my back out," the king of the shifters lied, his face the picture of absolute unrepentant dishonesty. He patted the silk sheets again. "It's a medical emergency, doctor. I need immediate relief." I stood by the heavy mahogany doors, clutching my medical bag like it was a holy relic that could ward off demons. Or, in this case, a 6'7" alpha with a penchant for public nudity and manipulation. "You look fine," I said, my voice echoing in the cavernous bedroom. "In fact, you look remarkably agile for a man who claims to be incapacitated." "Adrenaline," he countered smoothly, leaning back against the pillows. His skin was bronze against the white linen, the scars on his chest catching the firelight. "It's a survival mechanism, but inside, I am in agony." "Agony," I repeated flatly. "Excruciating." I narrowed my eyes. This was a game. He was the cat, and I was the mouse he had cornered in his luxury suite. But I wasn't a mouse. I was a board-certified physical therapist, and I didn't diagnose based on royalty. I diagnosed based on facts. "Fine," I said, marching toward the bed. "If you're in agony, I need to assess the damage. But I'm warning you, Your Majesty, if I find out you're wasting kingdom resources for a booty call, I will report you to, well, whoever keeps you in line." "No one keeps me in line, Margo," he purred, watching my hips as I approached. "That's why I hired you." I reached the side of the bed. It was huge. You could fit a small sedan on it. Being this close to him felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. The air around him crackled with that same static electricity I'd felt in the clinic. "Roll over," I ordered, dropping my bag on the nightstand with a heavy thud. He didn't argue. He rolled onto his stomach, burying his face in the pillows. The movement was fluid, powerful, and devoid of any sign of pain. "Shirt off," I said instinctively, before realizing he was already shirtless. I felt heat rush to my cheeks. "Right, never mind." I placed my hands on his lower back. The contact was electric. His skin was scorching hot, fever bright. Shifters ran hot, but Alpha Kings apparently ran nuclear. I could feel the thrum of his power beneath my palms, a low-frequency vibration that made my teeth ache. I probed his lumbar spine. I dug my thumbs into his paraspinals. I checked for spasms, for inflammation, for any sign of the injury he claimed to have. There was nothing. His back was a landscape of perfect, terrifying muscle. It was hard as steel. There wasn't a single knot, let alone a spasm. "You are lying," I whispered, pressing down hard on his spine. "Am I?" His voice was muffled by the pillow, but I could hear the smirk. "There is no injury here, no inflammation, no tightness." I moved my hands up to his shoulders. You are perfectly healthy. In fact, you're probably the healthiest thing in this zip code. He turned his head to the side, one golden eye fixing on me. Maybe the pain is deeper, he suggested. Maybe you need to press harder. If I press any harder, I'll bruise you. I heal fast. I glared at him. He wasn't in pain. He just wanted me to touch him. He wanted my hands on his skin, pushing, pulling, dominating. It was a power play. He was submitting to me physically so he could control me emotionally. You want deep pressure? I asked sweetly. Please. All right. I stepped back and opened my medical bag. I rummaged around until I found what I was looking for. A set of dry needling filaments, long, thin silver needles used to release trigger points. I held one up to the firelight. It glinted menacingly. If the pain is that deep, I said, manual therapy won't cut it. We need to go intramuscular. Ronan lifted his head. He looked at the needle. Then he looked at me. You're going to stab me? It's called dry needling, Your Majesty. It's very effective for stubborn pains in the ass. I uncapped the plastic tube. Lie still. If you move, I might hit a nerve. I expected him to back down. I expected him to say, okay, you caught me. Put the sharp object away. Instead, he dropped his head back onto the pillow and relaxed his shoulders. Do it, he said. I froze, the needle hovering over his trapezius. I'm serious, I warned. This isn't a massage. It stings. I have been stabbed by swords, claws, and cursed daggers, Margo, he mumbled. I think I can handle your little pin. He was calling my bluff. My hand shook slightly. I wasn't going to actually needle a healthy muscle. That was malpractice. But I couldn't back down now. He was testing me. I capped the needle and tossed it back in the bag. No, I said. I'm not wasting sterile equipment on a hypochondriac. He chuckled, rolling over onto his back. He lay there, glorious and sprawling, looking up at me with half-lidded eyes. You lost your nerve, doctor. I kept my ethics, I corrected. There's nothing wrong with your muscles, Ronan. You're bored, and you're using me for entertainment. Is it working? No. I crossed my arms over my chest. I am a medical professional. I am not a court jester. If you don't have a medical issue, I am leaving. I turned to grab my bag. Wait. His hand shot out, wrapping around my wrist. His grip was iron, unbreakable, hot, and possessing. He didn't pull. He just held me there. I do have an issue, he said, his voice dropping the playful tone. My heart rate hasn't dropped since you walked into the clinic this morning. I looked at the monitor on the nightstand. I hadn't noticed it before, but he was hooked up to a subtle bio-tracker on his wrist. The display showed his heart rate sitting at a steady 110 beats per minute. Resting for an alpha should be 60. That's... I frowned, stepping closer to look at the readout. That's tachycardia. Are you sick? Did you ingest poison? He pulled on my wrist, gently but firmly, until I was standing between his spread knees at the edge of the bed. No poison, he said, looking up at me. Just you. My breath hitched. Me? Every time you come near me, my blood boils. Every time you touch me, my wolf wakes up and starts pacing. He guided my hand, the one he was holding, and placed it flat against his bare chest, right over his heart. Thud, 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 thud. It was hammering against his ribs like a fist. Diagnose that, doctor, he whispered. I stared at his chest. I could feel the heat radiating through my palm. This wasn't a game anymore. This was biology. Primal, terrifying biology. "You're in a hyper-aroused state," I said clinically, trying to keep my voice steady. "Your sympathetic nervous system is firing on all cylinders." "And what is the cure?" I looked into his eyes. They were swirling with gold, the pupils blown wide. He looked like he was about to devour me. "Cold water immersion," I blurted out. He blinked. "What?" "You're overheating," I said, snatching my hand back. "You need to cool down immediately, or you'll go into shock." It was a lie. A terrible lie. But I needed to do something to break the tension before I climbed into that bed and did something that would get me fired. "Ice," I said firmly. "Lots of it." I marched him into the ensuite bathroom. Ensuite was an understatement. The room was larger than my entire apartment. It had black marble floors, gold fixtures, and a sunken tub that looked like a small swimming pool. "Fill it," I ordered, pointing at the tub. Ronan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over his massive chest. He looked skeptical. "You want me to take a bath?" "I want you to lower your core temperature before your heart explodes," I lied. "Cold water therapy. It's standard protocol for alpha agitation." He sighed, but he walked over and turned the tap. Massive jets of water began to fill the stone basin. "It needs to be cold," I added. "Freezing." I found a control panel on the wall and cranked the temperature dial all the way down to polar. The steam stopped. The water coming out of the faucet turned icy clear. "This seems excessive," Ronan noted, dipping a hand into the rising water. He hissed. "That is glacial." "It's medicinal," I said, standing my ground. "Get in." He looked at me. "Clothes and all? Unless you want to strip in front of me again," I challenged, "which I'm sure you do, but I'm on the clock." He smirked. "I have no shame, Margo, but for the sake of your blood pressure, I'll keep the pants on." He stepped into the tub. He didn't flinch. He didn't shiver. He just sank into the freezing water like it was a warm jacuzzi, submerged up to his waist. The black tactical pants clung to his legs. "Happy?" he asked, leaning back against the marble rim. He spread his arms along the edge, looking like a dark king on a watery throne. "Submerge your chest," I instructed. "The heart needs to be cooled." He slid lower until the water lapped at his collarbones. He closed his eyes and let out a long breath. "Better?" I asked, feeling a pang of guilt. That water had to be torture. "It helps," he admitted softly. "The fire is manageable now." I walked to the edge of the tub, kneeling down to check him. I reached out to touch his forehead, checking for fever. "Good," I murmured. "Just stay there for 5 minutes, and then—" Splosh! A hand shot out of the water and grabbed my wrist, wet, cold, and fast. Before I could scream, he yanked. I went flying. I hit the water with a splash that soaked the entire room. The shock of the cold punched the air out of my lungs. I thrashed, trying to find the surface, but strong hands grabbed my waist and hauled me up. I broke the surface, gasping, wiping freezing water from my eyes. I was sitting in the tub, in my uniform, and I was sitting squarely on King Ronan's lap. "What the hell?" I shrieked, hitting his chest with my wet hands. "Are you insane? It's freezing!" "I was cold," he rasped, his arms wrapping around me like steel bands, trapping me against his wet, hard chest. I needed a heat source. "I am going to kill you," I chattered, my teeth already clicking. "I am going to murder the king." "Do it later," he whispered, burying his face in the crook of my neck. He was freezing cold, but his breath was hot against my skin. "Right now, just warm me up." I tried to push away, but the friction of our wet clothes, the cold water, and the heat of his body created a sensation that short-circuited my brain. "Ronan," I warned, my voice trembling. "Margo," he answered against my skin. He pulled back just enough to look at me. Water dripped from his dark hair onto his nose. He looked wild, dangerous, and completely obsessed. "You're wet," he noted, his eyes dropping to my white medical coat, which was now clinging to me like a second skin. It was completely see-through. I looked down. I gasped and crossed my arms over my chest. "Don't look!" "Too late," he growled. He leaned in, his nose brushing against mine. "You prescribed this, doctor," he murmured, his lips hovering millimeters from mine. "Now you have to deal with the side effects." My lab coat was no longer a symbol of medical authority. It was a translucent, soaking wet rag clinging to my skin like plastic wrap. And beneath it, my bra, a sensible beige number I usually wore for 12-hour shifts, was now on full display to the king of the shifters. "Stop looking," I hissed, crossing my arms over my chest to salvage some shred of dignity. My teeth were chattering, but my face felt like it was on fire. "I can't," Ronan murmured. His voice was rough, darker than the freezing water surrounding us. "It's a tactical impossibility." He didn't let go of my waist. In fact, he pulled me closer. My knees bumped against his thighs underwater. The contrast was dizzying. The glacial bite of the ice bath against my legs, and the blast furnace heat radiating from his chest against my torso. "You need to let me go," I said, though the words lacked any real conviction. "The treatment is finished. Your heart rate should be down." "Check it," he challenged. He grabbed my hand, my wet, shivering hand, and pressed it back against his chest. Thump, 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 thump. It wasn't slowing down. If anything, it was faster. Heavy, hard strokes that felt like they were trying to bruise his ribs from the inside out. It's still elevated," I stammered. "This isn't working. The cold shock should have triggered a parasympathetic response." "Maybe the stimulus is wrong," he whispered. He leaned in, water dripping from his dark hair onto my cheek. "Maybe I need a different kind of release." I swallowed hard. We were dangerously close. I could smell the ozone scent of his skin, mixed with the expensive soap of the bathwater. His golden eyes dropped to my lips. "Ronan," I warned, my voice trembling. "I am your employee. This is a gross violation of workplace safety protocols." "Fire me," he replied against my mouth. He tilted his head. I stopped breathing. My brain was screaming, "Run!" but my body was screaming, "Finally!" I gripped his wet shoulders, my fingers digging into the hard muscle. I wasn't pushing him away. I was holding on. His lips brushed mine, a feather-light touch that sent a jolt of electricity straight to my toes. He groaned, a low, hungry sound, and his grip on my waist tightened, lifting me slightly in the water. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was polite, rhythmic, and absolutely devastating. We froze. "Your Majesty?" A muffled voice came through the heavy bathroom door. "General Orson is here. The council is assembled. It is urgent." Ronan let out a growl that actually rippled the surface of the water. He pulled back, his eyes flashing with frustration. For a second, he looked like he was going to ignore the door, the general, and the entire kingdom, just to finish what he started. "Tell Orson to wait," Ronan roared, not taking his eyes off me. "He says the border patrols have found debris, sire." The voice persisted. "He insists on your immediate presence." Ronan closed his eyes. He took a deep, shuddering breath, and the predator retreated behind the mask of the king. "Fine," he snapped. He looked at me. The heat was still there, but the playfulness was gone. "We aren't done, Margo," he promised. "But duty calls." He stood up. Water cascaded off his massive body like a waterfall. He stepped out of the tub, completely unbothered by his soaked pants or the puddle he was creating on the marble floor. He offered me a hand. I took it, and he hauled me out of the tub so effortlessly I felt weightless. I stood there, dripping, shivering, and mortified. "I need to go," I said, hugging myself. "I need dry clothes." "No time," Ronan said, grabbing a massive black towel from the rack. He didn't hand it to me. He wrapped it around my shoulders himself, rubbing my arms briskly to warm me up. "You're coming with me." "To the War Council?" I squeaked. "Looking like a drowned rat?" "You look like my drowned rat," he corrected, dropping a kiss on my wet hair. "And I need my doctor. My heart rate is still unstable, remember?" He didn't give me a choice. He threw a heavy, velvet-lined cloak over my shoulders. It smelled like cedar and power, and marched me out of the bedroom. We walked through the corridors at a breakneck pace. Ronan was still wet, his shirt clinging to him, his tactical pants dark with water. He looked terrifying, like a sea god who had just crawled out of the ocean to wreck a city. I trotted to keep up, clutching the cloak closed at my throat. My wet sneakers squeaked on the polished stone. "Ronan, I can't go in there," I hissed as we approached the double doors of the war room. "This is a meeting for generals. I fix knees. I don't plan invasions." "You are my medical detail," he said firmly. "Where I go, you go." The guards threw the doors open. The war room was intimidating. A massive stone table dominated the space, covered in holographic maps. 12 people sat around it, men and women in high-ranking armor. They all stopped talking when we entered. Their eyes went to Ronan, then to me, then to the puddle of water forming around my shoes. General Orson stood at the head of the table. He was an older wolf, gray-haired, with a scar running through one eye. He looked like he chewed gravel for fun. "Your Majesty," Orson said, his eyes narrowing as they landed on me. "We were not expecting guests." "She's not a guest," Ronan said, walking to the head of the table. He didn't sit in the high-backed chair. He stood behind it, gripping the wood until his knuckles turned white. "She is Dr. Vale, my personal physician." "Is the king ill?" Orson asked, his tone bordering on disrespectful. "Should we delay the campaign until you are recovering?" The room went silent. It was a challenge, a subtle one, but a challenge nonetheless. Ronan smiled. It was a terrifying expression. "I am fine, Orson," Ronan said softly. "Dr. Vale is here to monitor my vitals. High stress levels require supervision." He pulled a chair out, not at the back of the room, but right next to his throne. "Sit," he ordered me. I sat. I was dripping onto the velvet upholstery. I pulled the cloak tighter. "Now," Ronan said, leaning forward, his wet hair falling into his eyes, "tell me about the debris." The meeting was a blur of tactical jargon, flanking maneuvers, supply lines, rogue incursions. I tried to make myself invisible, but I could feel Orson's eyes on me. He didn't like me. He saw me as a weakness, a distraction. The northern pass is vulnerable, Orson argued, pointing to the map. We need to send the king's personal guard to reinforce the perimeter. And leave the palace exposed? Ronan countered. No. Are you afraid, sire? Orson asked. Or are you just distracted by your new pet? The heir left the room. Ronan went still. Careful, General. I only speak the truth, Orson sneered, looking directly at me. She is a civilian, a physical therapist. What place does she have in a war room? She is a liability. I didn't think. The exhaustion, the cold water, and the sheer audacity of this man snapped something inside me. Actually, General, I said, my voice ringing out clear and sharp. Everyone turned to look at me. Ronan looked down, surprised. I am not a liability, I said, standing up. The cloak billowed around me. I am the only person in this room who knows exactly how much stress the king's cardiovascular system can handle before he suffers a catastrophic event. If I say he stays in the palace to recover, he stays. Unless you have a medical degree hidden under that armor. Orson stared at me, mouth slightly open. I didn't think so, I continued, leaning my hands on the table. The king's health is a matter of national security. I am here to ensure he doesn't stroke out while you argue over supply lines. So, unless you want to explain to the kingdom why their alpha dropped dead on your watch, I suggest you let me do my job. Silence. Then a low chuckle. I looked at Ronan. He was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. It was pride, and heat, and absolute unadulterated hunger. You heard the doctor, Ronan drawled, his eyes gleaming. Proceed, General. The meeting dragged on for another hour. By the time the servants arrived with refreshments, I was exhausted again. My adrenaline spike had faded, leaving me shivering under the heavy cloak. Ronan hadn't let me leave. Every time I shifted in my chair, his hand would drift to my knee beneath the table, squeezing gently. A silent reminder, I'm here, you're mine. Wine, Your Majesty. A young servant boy appeared at Ronan's elbow, holding a silver goblet. He looked nervous, eat beaded on his upper lip. I watched him. It was a habit from the clinic, watching body language. Patients lied with their words, but their bodies told the truth. The boy's hands were shaking, not a little tremors, violent shakes. Thank you, Ronan said, reaching for the goblet without looking. He was still staring at the map. Wait, I said. The word was out of my mouth before I processed it. Ronan paused, his hand inches from the cup. Margo? His hands, I whispered, pointing at the servant. Look at his hands. The servant's eyes went wide. Panic, raw animal panic, flooded his scent. For the resistance! The boy screamed. He dropped the goblet. It didn't spill wine. It spilled a thick black sludge that sizzled when it hit the table. In the same motion, the boy pulled a dagger from his sleeve. It wasn't steel. It was obsidian glass, coated in the same black sludge. He lunged, not at Ronan, at me. I was the weak link. I was the unarmored civilian sitting right next to the king. I tried to scramble back, but the chair was heavy. I saw the blade coming down. I saw the boy's desperate, terrified eyes. Then, a shadow blocked out the light. Ronan didn't use magic. He didn't shift. He just moved with that impossible blur speed of an Alpha Prime. He threw his body between me and the blade. Shk! The sound of metal tearing through flesh was sickeningly wet. The boy screamed as Ronan backhanded him, sending him flying across the room to crash into the stone wall. The dagger went with him, but the damage was done. Ronan stood there for a second, swaying. He looked down at his left arm. There was a long, jagged slash through his bicep. "You missed," Ronan growled at the unconscious boy. Then he turned to me. "Are you hurt?" "Am I hurt?" I screamed, scrambling out of my chair. "You're bleeding!" "It's a scratch," he dismissed, lifting his arm to show me. But it wasn't a scratch. The blood wasn't red. It was black, and the veins around the wound were turning a dark, necrotic purple, visibly spreading up his arm toward his heart like spider webs of ink. "Wolf's Bane," General Orson shouted, drawing his sword. "Secure the room." Ronan stumbled. The color drained from his face in an instant. The invincible king, the man who had terrified me an hour ago, buckled. He fell to his knees. "Ronan!" I caught him, or tried to. He was too heavy. We both went down to the stone floor. He gripped my arm, his strength failing. "Margo, don't speak," I ordered, my hands pressing frantically against the wound. The black blood burned my skin. "Help him! Someone help him!" The royal healers rushed forward from the back of the room, their hands glowing with weak white magic. "Get back!" I snarled at them. "You can't heal Wolfsbane with magic. It accelerates the toxin." "He is the king," Orson shouted, looming over us. "Step aside, woman." I looked up at Orson. I was covered in freezing water and black blood. I was terrified, but I was also the best damn doctor in this castle. "He is my patient!" I screamed, my voice cracking with desperation. I grabbed a knife from the table, a steak knife from the untouched food platter. I ripped Ronan's sleeve open. The black veins were moving fast. They were already at his shoulder. If they reached his heart, he was dead. "Nobody touches him but me!" I yelled, raising the knife. "I have to cut it out." Ronan looked up at me, his eyes glazing over, the gold fading to a dull gray. "Do it," he rasped. "Do it," Ronan rasped, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about the fact that I was about to stab the king of the shifters with a serrated steak knife I'd snatched from a fruit platter. I didn't think about the dozen royal guards with swords drawn, screaming for me to step away. I only thought about the black line of necrotic poison racing up his bicep toward his heart. I poured a pitcher of high-proof whiskey, intended for the generals, over the blade and over his wound. "Hold him down!" I screamed at the frozen room. "If he moves, this knife slips, and I sever his brachial artery." General Orson stepped forward, his face purple with rage. "You are insane! You cannot operate on the floor of the—" "I said, hold him down!" I roared, snapping my head up to glare at the general. My eyes were burning, my hands slick with whiskey and sweat. "Unless you want to explain to the council why you let the king die while you argued about protocol, grab his legs." The sheer ferocity of my order broke the paralysis. Two of the younger guards dropped their weapons and threw their weight onto Ronan's legs. Orson, cursing under his breath, grabbed Ronan's good shoulder. "This is treason if he dies," Orson hissed at me. "If he dies, I'll let you execute me yourself," I snapped back. "Now hold him still." I looked down at Ronan. He was conscious, barely. His eyes were locked on mine, swirling with a murky, pained gray. He nodded, a fraction of an inch. "Trust." I gripped the steak knife. "This is going to hurt. I can't numb it." "I know," he whispered. I drove the tip of the knife into his flesh, right above the black slash. Ronan didn't scream. He made a sound much worse. A low, strangled noise in the back of his throat, like an animal trapped in a snare. His body arched off the stone floor, muscles seizing violently. "Hold him!" I yelled, struggling to keep my hand steady as his bicep bunched and fought against the blade. I had to be fast. Wolfsbane worked by coagulating the blood and rotting the tissue instantly. I had to carve out the infected meat before the rot spread to the main vein. It was butchery, pure and simple, but it was surgical butchery. I sliced deep, following the track of the poison. The smell was horrific, like burning rubber and rotten eggs. Black sludge poured out of the wound, sizzling on the stone floor. "Almost there," I chanted, mostly to myself. "Almost there. Almost there." Ronan's head fell back, his teeth gritted so hard I heard enamel crack. His hand, the one Orson wasn't holding, shot out and gripped my ankle. He squeezed. It felt like my bone was going to snap, but I didn't pull away. I let him anchor himself to me. "Got it," I breathed. With one final precise flick of my wrist, I severed the last chunk of blackened tissue. I used the flat of the blade to fling the poisoned mass across the room. Fresh, red blood welled up in the wound. Bright, beautiful, oxygenated crimson. "He's bleeding red!" one of the guards shouted. I didn't stop. "Pressure! I need pressure bandages! Give me your cloak!" I didn't wait for permission. I ripped the velvet cloak off the general's shoulders and pressed the expensive fabric directly into the gaping wound in the king's arm. "Ronan?" I tapped his cheek with my clean hand. "Ronan, stay with me." His head lolled to the side. His eyes were half closed, his skin gray and clammy. The adrenaline that had kept him conscious during the excision was gone, leaving him in shock. "Margo," he slurred. His grip on my ankle loosened, his hand sliding to the floor. "I'm here," I said, leaning over him, ignoring the blood soaking my knees. "I'm right here. You're going to be fine. You're just very dramatic." He tried to smile, but his eyes rolled back in his head. His breathing turned shallow and fast. "He's going into shock," I announced, standing up. My legs felt like jelly. "We need to move him to the royal chambers, now. And Orson?" The general looked at me. He looked at the blood on my hands, the knife on the floor, and the living king. The hostility was still there, but it was mixed with fear. "Get out of my way," I said. The next 4 hours were a blur of heat and panic. We had moved him to the massive bed in the royal chambers. I had stitched the wound, 22 stitches, neat and tight, but the residual toxins in his blood had triggered a metabolic firestorm. Shifters burn hot when they heal. Alphas burn hotter. Ronan was burning nuclear. The room was sweltering. I had dismissed the servants, dismissed the guards, and even kicked Orson out when he tried to offer tactical advice on fever management. It was just me and the delirious king. I wrung out a cloth in a basin of ice water and pressed it to his forehead. "So hot," Ronan mumbled, thrashing against the sheets. Sweat slicked his chest, making the scars shine. "Fire. Everywhere." "It's the wolfsbane," I soothed, wiping his neck. "Your body is burning it out. You just have to ride it out." He grabbed my wrist. His skin was scorching, dry and papery. His eyes snapped open, but they weren't focused on me. They were looking through me. "The doctor," he rasped. "Where is the doctor?" "I'm right here, Ronan." "No," he growled, agitation spiking his scent. It smelled like burnt cedar. The little one, the angry one, she yells. I couldn't help the small smile that tugged at my lips, even in the midst of the crisis. She yells because you don't listen. I like it when she yells. He confessed to the ceiling, his voice dropping to a slur. She doesn't care about the crown. She just wants perfect posture. He tried to sit up. I pushed him back down, putting a hand flat on his chest. Lie down, you'll rip your stitches. I need to tell her, he insisted, fighting my hands with clumsy, feverish strength. I need to tell her to stop. Stop touching everyone else. Only me. I don't touch everyone else, I whispered, dipping the cloth back in the ice water. Just you. He stilled. His gaze dropped to my face. For a second, clarity returned to the molten gold of his irises. He looked at me, really looked at me, with a hunger that had nothing to do with the fever. Margo, he breathed. I'm here. Mine, he growled. Before I could react, he lunged. It wasn't an attack, it was a claim. He sat up and buried his face in the crook of my neck, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin right over my pulse point. I froze. A shifter bite was permanent. It was a mating mark. If he broke the skin, I was his. Legally, biologically, eternally. Ronan, no, I said firmly, though my heart was hammering against his chest. You're delirious. You don't know what you're doing. I know, he rumbled against my skin. His tongue swiped over the spot he wanted to bite. I want to keep you. I want to mark you so Orson, so everyone knows. His teeth scraped my skin. He was on the edge. 1 millimeter more pressure, and it was done. Ronan! I shouted, using my bad dog voice. Heel! The command shocked him. He pulled back just an inch, blinking in confusion. You do not mark me without my consent, I said, my voice shaking but stern. And you certainly don't do it while you're hallucinating from poison. Lie down. He looked at me, torn between the instinct to claim and the instinct to obey the one person who wasn't afraid of him. But, he whined, actually whined. Down, I pointed to the pillow. He slumped back, defeated. You're so bossy. And you're sick, I said, reaching for my bag. I pulled out a syringe of sedative. I had been hoping to avoid it. His metabolism would burn through it in an hour anyway. But I couldn't risk him accidentally mating me in a fever dream. This is going to make you sleep, I said, uncapping the needle. I don't want to sleep, he muttered, his eyes tracking the needle. I want to finish what we started in the tub. We can discuss the tub when you aren't dying, I promised. Arm. He offered his arm. He trusted me implicitly. It terrified me. I injected the sedative. Stay with me? He asked, his eyelids already drooping. I'm not going anywhere, I said, brushing the damp hair off his forehead. He fought the darkness for one more second. When I wake up, I'm going to remember this, Margo. I'm going to remember that you stayed. Then he was out. Sunlight was streaming through the massive windows when Ronan finally woke up. I was sitting in a chair by the bed, nursing a cup of cold coffee. I hadn't slept. I had spent the night monitoring his vitals, changing his bandages, and, crucially, making sure he didn't try to bite anyone else. And, just as a precaution, I had taken measures. Ronan groaned. He shifted, trying to stretch his arms. Clink, clink. He froze. He pulled on his right arm. It stopped abruptly. He pulled on his left. Stopped. He opened his eyes and looked up. His wrists were secured to the mahogany bedposts with thick, added leather restraints. I had found them in his closet. I didn't want to know why he had them, but they were medical grade, so I used them. He tested the leather. He flexed his biceps. The wood of the bed frame creaked. He could break them if he really wanted to. He was an alpha king, but it would take effort. He turned his head slowly to look at me. I took a sip of my coffee. Morning sunshine. He looked at the restraints. Then he looked at me. A slow, wicked grin spread across his face. It wasn't the look of a trapped animal. It was the look of a man who had just discovered a new favorite hobby. Well, Ronan rasped, his voice deep with sleep. I assume this is medically necessary, Doctor. You were thrashing. I lied smoothly. I couldn't have you ripping your stitches. Restraints were the only option. Uh-huh. He tugged on the leather again, the cuffs straining against his wrists. And are you planning to untie me? Or is this part of the therapy? I stood up and walked to the side of the bed. I checked the monitor. His heart rate was normal. His temperature was down. The black veins were gone. That depends, I said, leaning over him. I placed my hand on his chest to check his skin turgor. Are you going to try to bite me again? He paused. His eyes dropped to my neck, then back up to my face. The memory of the night before was clearly coming back to him. I might, he admitted shamelessly. You taste like rain. Then you stay tied up. I reached for his injured arm. I undid the bandage to check the incision. It was healing beautifully. Shifter healing was a miracle. The angry red line was already fading to pink. It looks good, I murmured, my fingers tracing the skin around the stitches. You're lucky, Ronan. That knife was dirty. You saved my life, he said softly. The playfulness vanished. Orson told me. You cut the poison out while I was screaming. You weren't screaming, I corrected, focusing on the bandage so I didn't have to meet his intense gaze. You were vocalizing. Margo. He twisted his wrist in the restraint, trying to reach my hand. Look at me. I looked at him. He was helpless, tied to a bed, recovering from a poisoning, and yet he held all the power in the room. I yield, he whispered. My breath hitched. What? To you, he said. My body, my health, my temper. I yield. You are the only one allowed to hurt me, Margo. Because you're the only one who does it to save me. The confession hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Ronan, I started. I'm just your physical therapist. Not anymore, he said. He pulled against the restraints again, the wood groaning loudly this time. Now untie me, Doctor. I have a kingdom to address. And after that? He leaned up as far as the restraints would allow, his face inches from mine. After that, we are going to finish that conversation about the tub. There is no conversation, I said, reaching for the buckle on his left wrist. I was freezing. You were dying. It was a crisis. It was a beginning, he corrected. I popped the buckle open. He didn't rub his wrist. He didn't move away. The second his hand was free, he reached out and grabbed the back of my neck, pulling me down until our foreheads rested together. You're not going anywhere, Margo Vale, he whispered. You're mine now, and today, I'm going to make sure the whole world knows it. The trumpets were loud enough to liquefy my internal organs. I stood at the back of the great hall, sandwiched between the royal chef and a very nervous chambermaid. I was wearing a dress that cost more than my student loans, a midnight blue silk number that left my shoulders bare and hugged every curve I possessed. Ronan had sent it, along with a note that simply read, "Wear this, or wear nothing. Your choice. I had chosen the dress, mostly because General Orson was staring at me from the front row like he was visualizing my head on a spike. "All rise for His Majesty, King Ronan!" the herald bellowed. The heavy doors groaned open. The room, packed with hundreds of nobles, soldiers, and dignitaries, went dead silent. Ronan strode in. If I thought he was intimidating in a t-shirt or naked in a bathtub, I was unprepared for King Ronan in full regalia. He wore a high-collared tunic of black velvet embroidered with gold thread, a heavy fur-lined cloak that trailed behind him, and a crown of jagged obsidian that looked like it had been forged in a volcano. He didn't look like a patient. He didn't look like the man who had whined about an ice bath. He looked like a god of war. He walked past the bowing nobles, his face unreadable. He climbed the dais to the obsidian throne, spun around, and sat. He didn't slouch. He radiated absolute, crushing authority. His golden eyes scanned the room. They passed over the dukes. They passed over General Orson. They landed with laser precision on me. He didn't smile. "Dr. Margo Vale," his voice boomed, amplified by the acoustics of the stone hall. "Step forward." The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Everyone turned to look at me. The royal chef actually took a step away from me, as if bad luck was contagious. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This is it, I thought. He's going to fire me publicly, or arrest me, or send me back to the human world. I lifted my chin. I was a professional. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me tremble. I walked down the long red carpet. The sound of my heels echoed in the silence. I stopped at the foot of the dais, sank into a clumsy curtsy that made my knees pop, and straightened up. "Your Majesty," I said. Ronan looked down at me. From this angle, he was a giant. "It has come to the attention of the court," Ronan announced, his voice cool and detached, "that you have committed several grievous offenses against the crown in the last 48 hours. A gasp rippled through the room. General Orson smirked. "Offenses?" I asked, my voice tight. "Item 1, Ronan listed, ticking it off on a gloved finger. Insubordination. You ordered the king to strip naked in a government facility." The gasp turned into a murmur of shock. I felt my face heat up. "Item 2, Ronan continued, ignoring the crowd. Physical assault. You struck the king. You sat on the king. You shoved the king into a tub of freezing water against his will." "It was medical therapy," I protested, forgetting protocol. "You were overheating." "Item 3, Ronan said, his voice dropping an octave. Grievous bodily harm. You stabbed the king with a serrated steak knife." "To save your life!" I shouted, pointing a finger at him. "You were dying of wolfsbane poisoning. I cut the rot out." "Silence!" General Orson barked from the side. "You dare interrupt the king while he reads your crimes?" Ronan held up a hand. Orson snapped his mouth shut. "She has a point, General," Ronan murmured, a flicker of amusement finally breaking through his stoic mask. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "She did save my life, which brings us to the sentencing." He stood up. The movement was so sudden that half the front row flinched. He walked down the steps of the dais, one by one, until he was standing directly in front of me. The air between us crackled. The smell of cedar and rain enveloped me. For the crime of assaulting the king, Ronan said softly, so only I could hear the rough edge in his voice. And for the crime of saving the king, I hereby sentence you. I held my breath. To what? The dungeon? To life, he declared. He raised his voice so the whole room could hear. I hereby appoint Dr. Margo Vale as the royal keeper of the king's body. She is the only person in this kingdom permitted to touch me, treat me, or issue commands regarding my physical state. Her word on my health is law. If she says I sleep, I sleep. If she says I stay, I stay. He reached out and took my hand. He didn't shake it. He pulled me closer, right into his personal space. Furthermore, Ronan continued, his thumb tracing the pulse point on my wrist. Since this position requires 24-hour monitoring, she will be moved into the royal chambers, effective immediately. The crowd went absolutely wild. Whispers of mistress and queen flew around the room like birds. You can't do that, I hissed, looking up at him. That's not a job description, that's a marriage contract. Call it what you want, Margo, he whispered, his golden eyes burning. But you're not leaving. You claimed me on that floor when you cut me open. Now I'm returning the favor. He turned to the crowd, still holding my hand. Are there any objections? He challenged the room. General Orson looked like he wanted to object very much. He looked at Ronan's face, the possessive set of his jaw, the glowing eyes. Orson swallowed his objection and bowed low. None, Your Majesty. Good. Ronan looked back at me. Now, Doctor, since you are officially on the clock, he did something that made the entire court freeze. The massive, terrifying Alpha King dropped to one knee in front of me. A collective intake of breath sucked the oxygen out of the room. Kings did not kneel. Not ever. Not for anyone. I stared down at him, wide-eyed. Ronan, what are you doing? Get up! I have a numbness in my leg, he said loudly, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. He grabbed my hand and placed it on his thigh, right on the massive quadricep muscle. I need you to check my reflexes, right now. You are ridiculous, I whispered, my face burning. You just want me to touch you in front of everyone. Is it working? He grinned, looking up at me from his knees. Are they watching? I looked around. Every single person in the room was staring at my hand on the king's thigh. The message was clear. He kneels for her. She owns him. Fine, I sighed, playing along. I dug my fingers into his muscle, feeling the rock-hard tension beneath the velvet. Flex for me. He groaned, a low sound that the microphone unfortunately caught. Perfect, he rasped. Now, about that follow-up appointment? He stood up, effortlessly scooping me into his arms bridal style. The crowd erupted into applause, mostly out of fear, but some out of genuine shock. Put me down, I squeaked. I have legs. You have a new office to inspect, he said, turning toward the private exit behind the throne. And I believe I'm overdue for my physical. He carried me out of the great hall, leaving the court, the general, and dignity behind. The heavy doors slammed shut, sealing us in the quiet of the corridor. He didn't put me down. He started walking faster, his stride long and purposeful, heading straight for the staircase that led to the bedroom. You're enjoying this way too much, I accused, wrapping my arms around his neck to keep from falling. Margo, he said, glancing down at me with a look that melted my insides. I have been waiting for you to yell at me all day. Don't stop now." He kicked open the door to his bedroom. "Now," he said, kicking the door shut behind us and locking it. "About that reflex check, I think we need to do a more comprehensive exam." "Locking the door is a violation of fire safety regulations," I managed to say, backing up until the back of my knees hit the edge of the massive mattress. Ronan didn't stop. He stalked forward, shedding his heavy velvet cloak and letting it drop to the floor in a heap of expensive fabric. He unbuttoned the high collar of his tunic, his eyes never leaving mine. "I am the fire, Margo," he murmured, stepping between my legs. "Let it burn." He placed his hands on my waist, his thumbs digging into the silk of my dress, and lifted me. I gasped as he set me onto the high mattress, not gently, but with a possessive weight that made the breath catch in my throat. He didn't climb on top of me. Instead, he stood there, towering over the bed, waiting. "Well?" he asked, his voice rough. "Aren't you going to conduct your intake exam? I believe I have several muscles that need deep tissue work." I looked at him, the king of the shifters, the man who had just knelt before the entire court to give me his power. He looked wild, hungry, and completely at my mercy. I took a breath and summoned Dr. Vale. "Shirt," I ordered, pointing a finger at his chest. "Off." He grinned, a wicked, boyish expression that made my heart stutter. "Yes, ma'am." He pulled the tunic over his head and tossed it aside. The sight of him never got old. The scars, the ink, the sheer density of muscle. But this time, there was something new. The fresh pink scar on his arm where I had cut the poison out. I reached out, tracing the line of the incision with my fingertip. "It healed well," I whispered. "Because of you," he said, leaning into my touch. He turned his head and kissed my palm. "Everything is because of you." "Ronan," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "do you realize what you just did out there? You gave me total authority over the crown." "I gave you authority over the king," he corrected. He placed his hands on the mattress on either side of my hips, caging me in. "The crown is a burden. You are my anchor. Without you, I'm just a weapon. With you, I'm a man." He lowered his head, his nose brushing against mine. "So," he breathed against my lips, "what are my orders, doctor?" I looked into those golden eyes. I saw the playful challenge, but I also saw the deep, desperate need for control. He needed someone strong enough to hold his leash. I grabbed the lapels of his imaginary collar and pulled him down. "Shut up," I whispered, "and kiss me." He obeyed with terrifying enthusiasm. Few months later, the digital clock on the nightstand read 11:15 p.m. I tapped my fingernail against the glass face of my watch. Tap, tap, tap. The room was silent, save for the crackling of the fireplace. I was sitting up in bed, wearing one of Ronan's oversized black t-shirts and reading a medical journal on advanced regenerative therapies. But I wasn't reading. I was waiting. The heavy mahogany doors creaked open. King Ronan slipped inside, trying to be quiet. He was still wearing his tactical gear from the Border Patrol inspection, mud on his boots, a smear of grease on his cheek, and looking exhausted. He froze when he saw me. He saw the lamp on. He saw the crossed arms. He saw the watch. He winced. "I know," he started, raising his hands in surrender. I know. "Shift ended at 1800 hours, I said, my voice cool and clinical. There was a bridge collapse in the eastern sector, he explained, towing off his boots by the door. I had to hold the main support beam while the engineers fixed the strut. You used your back as a construction crane? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Without a warm-up? I stretched, he lied. He walked toward the bed, looking like a guilty puppy who knew he had chewed the sofa. Margo, I swear, I did the hip rotations you taught me. Liar. I am the king. I do not lie. You are a patient with a history of lumbar strain and a hero complex, I countered. I snapped the medical journal shut and placed it on the nightstand. Come here. He walked to the side of the bed. He loomed over me, blocking out the light, massive and dirty, and smelling of rain and hard work. He looked at me with that familiar mix of adoration and arousal. You're late, I scolded, looking up at him. 15 minutes late for your curfew. Do you think your cortisol levels care about a bridge? He smiled. It was the slow, lazy smile of a man who was exactly where he wanted to be. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his rough fingers lingering on my neck. I tried to hurry, he murmured. I drove the jeep like a maniac. I terrified 3 guards. Not good enough, I said, fighting the smile that wanted to break through. You broke protocol. You neglected your recovery time, and you made me wait. He leaned down. His golden eyes were glowing in the dim light. He climbed onto the bed, crawling over the duvet until he was hovering over me, careless of the dirt he was getting on the pristine white sheets. He lowered his head until his lips were an inch from my ear. I was bad, he whispered, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that went straight to my core. I broke the rules. I was insubordinate. He pulled back to look at me, his eyes dark with promise. Apologies, ma'am, he growled softly. Punish me. Quick favor, don't go anywhere yet. If you thought Margo was brave for slapping the king, wait until you meet this next heroine. She didn't just scold the alpha. She lit him up with 50,000 volts in the royal vaults. And instead of dropping, he roared, "Do it again." You have to hear this disaster unfold. Click the video on your screen right now. Hands in the air! It is absolutely unhinged.